This is Tetris. And this is modern Tetris.
Like, just as often.
Oh no, if Vince had that T-spin, that would've been a T-spike!
There's no way Vince survives that!
Oh my god! What are you doing? Vince is alive!
That's nuts! That's criminal! What?
Vince is still alive!
Most people think of Tetris as a simple puzzle game, but over the past few decades, it's evolved into one of the fastest, most competitive, and most brutally unforgiving esports on the planet.
To keep the owl alive. And that is quite a spike.
But before we can dive right in to this fascinating world of modern competitive Tetris, we should first talk about the basics. The first thing you'll notice about modern Tetris is that it's insanely fast. Unlike the NES or Game Boy versions, where pieces fell slowly and every placement was permanent, modern Tetris gives players far more control. You can hard drop pieces instantly, rotate them in ways that would be impossible in the old games, and even save one for later using the hold system. That freedom completely changes the game. Classic Tetris, while impressive in its own right, is all about survival.
An eyepiece would be helpful, but guess what? We are running into a drought, the hallmark of this event. He is now in survival mode. Bart, that's incredibly smart. The well is now open. Does he get the long bar? Yes, he does!
But modern Tetris is about speed, precision, and relentless aggression.
Old Tall, who's currently just outside of the top 64 bubble, will likely shoot to around top 40. So those will probably be the updates to look for.
The additional layer of modern Tetris as a 1v1 multiplayer game creates a fascinating game to watch. In a head-to-head game, you're able to focus on the single-player aspect and watch an elegant puzzle unfold.
Going into a PC game from both players, Westall hits a second, and Vince does too as well. Third from Westall, and Vince is the one.
At the same time though, if you zoom out, you realize there's another whole layer of complexity entirely. Things like how safe or dangerous is your board state. The accepting of your opponent's garbage to give yourself more material to try to spike out your opponent. And the split-second decisions that you have to make to try to downstack and open your well under the pressure of knowing your opponent's about to send another attack. Every single line, every placement, and every choice matters. As a top 100 Tetris player in the US and top 600 worldwide, I want to show you the hidden depth and spectacle that is modern Tetris, and why it's way more interesting than it might seem on the surface. So to try to understand what's happening in a high-level match, first, we need to cover the fundamentals. Single-player Tetris is a very simple game. To give a quick rundown on the controls, you can move pieces to the left or to the right, rotate them clockwise or counterclockwise, and finally, you can soft drop or hard drop. These movements are simple, but with just these basic actions, the possibilities are limitless. You might wonder how in the world people can play so fast. There are two main factors that determine a player's speed. The first is how optimally you can move each piece to its desired location. With a concept called finesse, a player should be able to move a piece to any location in only 2 steps. This combined with the fact that in modern Tetris games like Tetris and jstris, you can modify the settings to make your piece move instantly across the board, forming the foundation for high-level Tetris execution. The second and arguably more important factor in how top players play so fast isn't just their hands, it's how fast they can process where to place all their pieces. Take a look at the piece preview in the top right corner. For a new player, it's difficult to even think about where to place one piece, let alone 2. The best players, however, consider the entire preview and plan several moves in advance. This might seem daunting or even impossible, but learning Tetris is a lot like learning piano. At first, you can only play one note at a time, looking down at your fingers and playing each key. With practice, however, you can play single notes seamlessly. And eventually, a pianist can glance at any chord and play it perfectly without even thinking. Similarly, top Tetris players can glance at 2 or 3 upcoming pieces and instantly see a pattern to fill a gap or set up a combo. The reason players can come up with placements so seamlessly is because they stack in a way that keeps their board as flat as possible. A flat stack gives the most options, since almost any piece can fit anywhere on the board. A flat stack also means fewer gaps, which makes it easier to place any piece without hesitation. This is what allows players to keep dropping pieces at high speeds. The biggest slowdown comes from what's called creating a dependency, or spots in your stack that require a very specific piece to fix. Examples are jagged stair shapes that only a T-piece can fix, 2 deep gaps that require an L or a J, and lastly, a 3 or more deep gap that requires an I piece. If you don't get these pieces in time, your stack will get very messy and you'll be forced to slow down. One way to avoid dependencies is by looking at your queue. Before placing a piece, check to see whether it will create one of these dependencies. If it does, check to see if the pieces coming up will fix these dependencies. And if not, try to look for another place to put the piece. For anyone that hasn't tried Singleplayer Tetris yet, I'd recommend hopping on Tetrio and just playing some 40-line sprint. Keep a column open on the left or the right and try to clear only Tetrises. This sounds simple, but trust me, it's much harder than it looks. To start, I'd recommend Kesdevez's Guide to Tetrio series. Now that we've covered Singleplayer Tetris, one question might still be on your mind. What the hell is a T-spin?
Donated a T-spin in the center, reading a little bit, but it doesn't matter. Vince with the I-spin, setting up for the T-spin triple. Will they continue this back-to-back on a sidewell?
Dude, Promo's playing at 6 pieces per second. I just realized.
Promo's had enough of this. Promo just wants to get Turtle out of this.
It's not really stopping that much, but I don't want to say it's over.
Oh my goodness. DL, what are you doing?
No.
Is he gonna live this?
Oh my god.
Are you serious? The stuff DL is doing is so risky. But it's what you need to do.
40 spikes.
You need to get those 40 spikes to be able to beat CZ just once.
Oh my god, it's over.
You can do it. And CZ is your Tetrio Cup 15 champion.
So that's a T-spin. But before we can ask why people use T-spins, we have to understand one of the most important aspects of multiplayer Tetris: garbage. When you clear a Tetris, or 4 lines at once with the eyepiece, you send 4 lines of garbage to your opponent. That's why new players are always taught to keep it clean and go for only Tetrises, because clearing fewer lines is much less efficient. Clearing only 1 line sends nothing, 2 lines sends only 1 line of garbage, 3 sends 2, but 4 lines sends 4 lines of garbage. But this is where T-spins come in. A T-spin double clears only 2 lines, but actually sends 4 lines of garbage, the same as a Tetris, meaning you have to stack half the amount to get the same output. This is why T-spins are so prevalent in multiplayer Tetris. They're the most efficient way to send lines to your opponent. But when you or your opponent send lines, there's one catch. The garbage hole spawns randomly. This is where things get tricky. If your board isn't flat, or if you accidentally cover the garbage holes, you'll have no way to get out and escape. And this is realistically the #1 reason why people die when playing competitive multiplayer Tetris. Not because they couldn't play fast enough, but because their stack got messy. So how do you survive? In modern Tetris, offense is the best defense. When you send garbage at the same time as your opponent, the lines cancel out. That means even if you're under pressure, going for a T-spin or a Tetris can save you by erasing the incoming lines. That's why at high level play, even when the board looks very scary, top players don't just panic and downstack. They'll look for a quick T-spin or a clean attack to cancel garbage, keep their flat stack, and set up the next escape. It's survival through aggression. Defensive play is important. After all, you only lose when you top out. But if your board is clean and you're not in any danger of your opponent's attacks, you should actually be playing very aggressively. In these situations, instead of canceling garbage, players will accept it, then counter-spike using that extra material. This not only lets you send more lines, but also prevents your opponent from canceling your attack. One thing to note is that players will often accept clean garbage, or lines that are neatly stacked in one single column. Clean garbage usually comes from big attacks like T-spins and Tetrises, but sometimes the garbage you receive is what's known as cheese. These are messy lines with scattered holes, often sent during combos where many attacks stack up. Cheese is much harder to clear efficiently, and players stuck with it are usually forced into an uphill battle. This distinction is important because attacks are the primary resource in Tetris. Clean garbage gives you the offensive power for Tetrises and T-spins, while also being the safest at downstack. Cheese, on the other hand, is much less preferable. It can pile up into a real threat that alone can cost you the round. This is why you'll often hear commentators point out how much cheese is on a player's board. It directly reflects how safe their board is in the face of incoming attacks.
To finally break out of it and now deal with all of this cheese that Togaya has sent.
Wait, there's so much cheese on CZ's board, and CZ's trying to send it back, but Bar just keeps on canceling.
Another key piece of offense in modern Tetris is combos. In Tetrio, when you clear lines back to back in a chain, each successive clear adds extra lines of garbage. On top of that, combos amplify the power of any T-spins or Tetris included with them, making them even more powerful. In combination, accepting clean garbage and chaining combos down is one of the most reliable ways to overwhelm your opponent. So the next time you watch a Tetris match, pay attention to how garbage is used both defensively and offensively, and how it shapes the health of their board. The thing about multiplayer Tetris is that there's a pretty high skill floor. Before you can even start playing around with all these competitive concepts, you need at least a decent grasp of stacking. Without this fundamental skill, your downfall will be yourself, without an opponent even in the picture. But once you learn basic stacking, that's when the game really opens up and becomes a much more rewarding game. Since Tetris is a 1v1 game, without any real explicit instructions, every player begins to play in their own unique way. I'll cover 4 main categories of playstyles, and while distinct, are not exclusive of one another. The first 2 playstyles are the more offensive ways to play Tetris, focusing on sending lines and topping out your opponent through attacks you stack yourself. Firstly, we have opener mains. These players lean on the consistency of what's called the 7-bag. The 7-bag is another defining rift between modern and classic Tetris. In classic Tetris, the pieces that you place are generated randomly, which makes stacking much more unpredictable. Sometimes you'll end up with too many O pieces, or need a specific piece for a dependency on the board that never comes. And most notably, are droughts, which is the reason you see so many clips where players have a Tetris ready, but the I piece never comes. Modern Tetris uses a randomizer called the 7-bag, which is called this because there's 7 different pieces in Tetris. The way it works is that the first 7 pieces you receive will be one of each of the 7 pieces in a random order. Once these 7 pieces have all been cycled through, the next bag will start with each of the 7 pieces in another random order. This pattern continues forever and is the reason why top players will almost always have an attack ready, as they are playing 3, 4, or even 5 pieces per second and will cycle through an entire bag in about 2 seconds. Because the piece order is predictable, players have popularized ways to optimize the first few bags and create setups with the highest chance of knocking out their opponents. These openers are called kill openers and are notorious in the lower to even mid ranks, as they can send more than 20 lines, more than a full board's worth of garbage, and players at these ranks are not ready to cancel them. The second category of players are what are known as striders. Striders are all about speed. These players will sacrifice efficiency to maximize their PPS, or pieces per second. Their main goal is to drown you in attacks. The idea is, if they're playing faster than you, it doesn't matter if some of their play is inefficient, you'll be under pressure the entire time. The latter 2 playstyles are more on the defensive end, and they're more focused on survival and finding an opening for an attack. The third type of player is what's known as a plonker. This type of player is the opposite of a strider. They play slow on purpose, and their goal is to tank clean garbage and then turn it into a huge counter spike. They play patiently and defensively, and win by waiting for you to overextend. The fourth type of playstyle is what's known as infinite downstacking. Instead of chasing Tetrises and T-spins, these players will clear garbage and get down to the bottom as fast as possible, sending singles, doubles, triples, and any combo that will keep their board low, while never leaving yourself vulnerable. With this kind of playstyle, they're sending many small attacks, which end up as cheese on their opponent's boards. This kind of playstyle works much better at the lower ranks, where players are not efficient in their downstacking, and as you climb to higher ranks, people will start sending attacks that you cannot survive without having attacks to cancel. You'll notice that focusing solely on one playstyle has weaknesses. For opener mains, the mid-game is a challenge, as their relative skill level to their rank is usually much lower. For striders, efficiency and clean stacking decisions are often lacking. For plonkers, speed and building quick attacks when their opponent is not sending clean can be an issue. And finally, infinite downstackers' lack of Tetrises and T-spins often lead to not having cancellation material when spiked or kill potential when they're trying to spike. This is why, at the top level, players are mostly well-rounded in all of these areas, and use whichever one is most suitable in the board state that they are in. The start of the round is almost always with an opener, to maximize the attacks you can produce with the first few bags. If your opponent is in a dangerous position and don't have any big attacks to send to you, striding is your best bet to pressure and try to find that final push to top them out. Conversely, if your opponent has big attacks ready, plonking is good to set you up for a massive counterspike. And finally, if you're the one cheesed up and in danger, being proficient in downstacking and swiftly opening up your well is a crucial skill to have to survive the next barrage of attacks. In every competitive esport, it's not just the high-level gameplay that reels spectators in, but the storylines and player identities that make it even more compelling. Stories like how players made their way through the bottom of the losers bracket and clawed their way to a championship title, or seeing two contrasting personalities and playstyles meet, are some of the most iconic moments in esports history.
What was that? Baker with a huge...
One of the best games to showcase this is Super Smash Bros. Melee. At the top level, it's always electric to watch different characters and matchups. For example, Hungry Box versus Mango, who have a long rivalry against each other and play in completely different ways. But you can simplify it even down to players playing the same character. Take Nun versus Wizrobe. Both of these Captain Falcon players play the same character with the same moveset, yet approach them in polar opposite ways. Take a look at how the same down throw leads to entirely different follow-ups, depending on who's holding the controller. Tetris is just as fascinating. Even though each player is given the same exact sequence of pieces, the way they see patterns, build stacks, and prioritize decisions can look completely different. Some players value keeping their board as clean and flat as possible, while others take riskier routes to squeeze out that little bit of extra damage. The beauty of this game is that there isn't just one correct solution. Multiple paths can work, and it's those different paths that give each player a signature style. Compared to classic Tetris, where player expression is mostly limited to how you handle awkward piece sequences or whether you risk your board for big Tetrises, modern Tetris, and more specifically, uncapped versions like Tetrio and jstris, have impossibly high skill ceilings. Players aren't just racing for speed, but they're constantly balancing raw pace against decision-making, survivability, and efficiency. To bring it back to Smash, this is similar to why many fans find Melee to be such a compelling spectator esport compared to newer titles like Ultimate. Both games run deep, but Melee's fast-paced nature and added movement options allow for radically different combos and player expression. In the same way, modern Tetris gives competitors the freedom to showcase their own fingerprints through speed, creativity, and adaptation, making every high-level match feel completely unique. Take Firestorm for example, one of the greatest striders of all time. At his peak, he could outclass almost everyone through sheer speed and overwhelm his opponents with non-stop pressure. Watching Firestorm felt less like a head-to-head match and more like a single-player showcase of mastery. He was that dominant, to the point where he even made an appearance on the news.
And he just broke a world record in Tetris.
Now imagine I'm walking down the aisle and this is what I see.
Ready, Russ?
Out of the corner of my eye.
Then there's CZ Small, the undisputed king of Season 1 Tetrio. Famous for his quirky habit of triple rotating his pieces, CZ set the standard for efficiency. His board states were always immaculate, to the point where it felt like it was nearly impossible to take a round off of him. And when he finally decided to close out a game, his burst play was devastating. Today, the crown belongs to Diao, the current best player in the world. He's won every recent tournament and is known for his LST stacking and overwhelming offense. But what truly set him apart was his downstacking. Entire rounds can flip in an instant when he unleashes what the community now calls a Diao stack. These are massive, board-clearing combos that turn defense into offense in a spectacular fashion. And then you have Vince HD, once known primarily for his blazing speed, but watch him for one set and your mind will be blown, as his misdrop vision and survival instincts are like no other player. And these are just a few names. A few other top players I'll mention are Gohan, whose Season 2 all-spin striding is redefining the game.
Exactly how long it takes to get to that next quad.
Promo, with his bread and butter 6-3 stacking.
Back out. Promo's got the center wheel garbage to assist in this spike.
And Caboozled Pie, because did someone say MK? The beauty of competitive Tetris is that you don't just recognize players by their names, you recognize them by their decisions, their tendencies, and their unique approach to solving the puzzle.
It's too crazy right now. Look at this.
What? Is that a mid-game Trinity?
Watching two aggressive players go head-to-head is like a lightning-fast game of ping-pong, with clean garbage flying back and forth at insane speeds. But put an aggressive player against a defensive one, and suddenly it's a tense game of chess. Patience versus pressure, risk versus reward. And that's the magic of the competitive scene. It's not just about who wins, but how they win and what their playstyle says about them. So at this point, I've covered a lot of the base fundamentals. Really just the bare minimum you need to follow along in a high-level Tetris match. But honestly, this is just scratching the surface. The depth of modern Tetris goes way beyond just clean stacking and knowing when to downstack. Top players have entire libraries of setups burned into their muscle memory. Dozens of T-spin setups, creative spins for every piece, and the ability to instantly adjust based on their cue. To most people, their boards look like pure chaos, but in reality, almost every placement is intentional. One thing that blew my mind when I first learned about it was a concept called counting to 4. This basically just means to stack 4 lines to clear your Tetris, but you have to be wary about the residue it leaves over. This is especially important to continue to build up back-to-back, which put simply, gives you bonus attack power. But try doing this when you're getting pressured and trying to stay alive. That's insanely difficult. But if you watch top players closely, you'll see that they're constantly doing this, always keeping their back-to-back chain alive. If you really want to see how deep this game goes, I recommend watching top players and asking yourself, why did they stack that way? Pay attention to not just the board, but to their upcoming cue. You'll start noticing patterns and decisions that make their gameplay seem much more intentional than it might first appear. If you'd like me to make a follow-up video that go a little deeper into these concepts, let me know down in the comments. Before I wrap up, I should mention that most of this video has been about Tetrio, but there are plenty of other modern Tetris titles with similar rule sets, like Puyo Puyo Tetris or Tetris Effect Connected. Each game has its own quirks, communities, and competitive scenes, which are all worth exploring if you're curious. I originally decided to make this video because I've seen a lot of attention on classic Tetris in the mainstream media. While that's awesome, I also wanted to highlight a different side of the game, one that I find just as competitive and just as compelling. Thank you guys for watching, and who knows, maybe I'll see you on the competitive ladder someday.